So, there's no easy way to talk about what I'm going to be talking about, but that's not to say all of it has to be bad news. Um, with that being said, I, for a long time, have felt like I couldn't talk to anybody about what's going on with me due to all of the elements involved inside of the situation. It's also not just my information, but after a lot of talking and going through the situation itself, we finally hit a point where we just have to talk about it. And that's fine. We planned to and wanted to anyway. We just never knew when was the appropriate time, as well as handling the situation itself has just been so chaotic and so hectic that we couldn't really find the words to talk about the situation as it was changing so much. In December, me and Tristan were blessed being told that I was pregnant. We were working towards a child, brother for Icarus actually, for quite some time, and decided that we wanted them to be pretty close in age. So we were working towards a child and we were blessed with a pregnancy. With that being said, everything went well and we wanted to announce our pregnancy around the 20-week mark, which ironically enough is when we were blessed enough to find out that we got the boy that we asked for. Easy for anyone to hear, especially when you find out that the circumstance that you're in is so extremely rare that only 3% of pregnancies experience it, and due to the fact that I was so early on, actually only 1% of that 3% experience it that early on. And what I was experiencing is something called PPROM, or preterm pre-rupture of membranes, which is when your water breaks, and mine broke at 20 weeks. Put us in a position to where I should have been having the kid within 24 hours, if not 48, and in less and less and less cases actually fighting 1 in 100 chances that I'd last longer than 2 weeks. And I did. To grasp a little bit better of an understanding of what PPROM is, I was also experiencing internal bleeding, which made my placenta extremely swollen. Due to the pre-rupture of the membranes, I was leaking amniotic fluid, which is the baby's life source. It's what the baby breathes and develops their lungs with. It's also what keeps the umbilical cord from being restricted in the womb. Essentially, I had no fluid, and I was experiencing bleeding on the placenta, which was also suffocating the baby and making it very constricted for him to move. I wasn't bleeding vaginally, but I was bleeding constantly internally, and the constant swelling of blood and the lack of actual fluid put him in a position to where he was only able to drink out of very small pockets of fluid. So at any point in time, he actually could have not made it through that process in the womb. They say that the survival chances for children like this that go through this is 1 in 100, and I'm fighting 1 in 1,000 chances of him surviving through to term or just through to life. So I've already beat 1 in 100 odds by lasting more than 2 weeks, and this wasn't something that was easy to share with anybody. I was bleeding internally for about a month and a half, and I was also risking sepsis on my own, which is the biggest cause of maternal fatality. Now, PPROM is the cause of a lot of premature children, but due to how early on that I was experiencing PPROM, they really didn't think there was a lot of chance for me at all. They asked us whether or not we would like to terminate, in which we decided not to and wanted to press through, since the odds seemed to be on our side for long enough. And I had to go up every week to check my fluid levels. Now, at 24 weeks so I did make it a whole month. I made it a whole month with PPROM and low fluid. Now this is like the most, it's the most crucial time period for a baby to be having this fluid, due to the fact that this is the most important time for their lungs to be developing, as after 23-24 weeks they wean off of the fluid. So even if my child was producing more at 23 to 24 weeks, producing his own amniotic fluid, it would constantly be leaking out of me. So at 24 weeks, they typically do put you as an inpatient inside the hospital. The risk of sepsis turning into a dangerous situation, not only for the child but for you, needs to be consistently monitored, because if you do experience sepsis, it could not only be very, very fatal quickly to the child, but very fatal and quickly to the mother as well. So they wanted to constantly monitor and make sure that any infection or anything couldn't arise in the case that they would have to, you know, I guess induce and hope for the best. At 24 weeks, I was supposed to be put in as an inpatient, but due to the COVID, they actually talked to me about all of the care. I wouldn't have been able to see Tristan or my our son Icarus, for an unknown amount of time, and you know, the longer the better in the situation where they'd be watching me, because I'd obviously want to be holding the child as full to term as I could. With that being said, I made it to about 25 weeks and 4 days, and I started going into labor. I was really happy to make it past the 24-week mark, because then that's when they got to tell us that our son was a viable pregnancy. But that also means that continuing with that pregnancy and continuing with that viability meant, instead of having a miscarriage, if our son didn't make it, I would instead have to have a funeral. So at 25 and a half weeks, I started having extreme contractions. I'm pretty sure that I had lost my mucus plug, and I was so used to leaking that I couldn't tell by my water breaking, because my water had already broken. I was lucky to make it to 25 weeks. But due to the fact that it was such an early delivery, it was a really scary situation for us both. I spent a lot of time in labor when I should have been getting an emergency C-section, and I pretty much had almost an entirely vaginal birth, due to the fact that I had to wait for pediatricians to come all the way 2 hours away from the medical facility that would be taking care of our newborn, and I pretty much just had to wait it out so that there would be people there that could try to keep him alive when I had him. So I went through a lot of the birthing process, and finally they had arrived after about 4 or 5 hours of the hospital and about 8 to 9 hours into labor. I was able to go through with the C-section. Now, I already had a C-section prior due to the fact that our son was breech, but this is a little different. He was breech this time, but I had to have a C-section due to the seriousness and all of the potential health complications, as well as brain bleed that he could experience through vaginal birth. So even though I did experience a lot of vaginal birth, successfully we did have a C-section, and unfortunately they had to do a transverse C-section, which is a little different than my previous one. Now, the external wound is still a horizontal line, but the internal wound that they had, the internal incision that they had given me, it was now a vertical one. This also means that I will never have the ability to have a vaginal birth in my life. So if I have kids continuing on from now, I'll never be able to experience natural vaginal birth. Also, that means that I have twice the times of scars. I have one this way and this way that I'm healing from internally. So the pain is much different. I'd like to announce the birth of our son, Velvett Fern. We call him Fern, we call him Velvett, we don't mind which one. But in the first 24 hours of life, he was at such a critical state. His lungs were leaking air because of the inability to develop his lungs properly. They were putting tubes in to drain the extra air that was leaking out of his body, and were even considering putting a larger tube in his chest and in through his armpit, through his chest, so that he could at least expel the air in a way that wouldn't kill him. He's so tiny that they didn't weigh him, but last time I got my ultrasound, he was 1 pound and 4 ounces. So we're going to assume that he is less than 1.5 pounds. He was born on the 8th, and that goes without saying that he has survived at least 48 hours now. That's amazing. Children born at his age are lucky to live past the first 24 hours. But due to the fact that they waited for the best neonatal unit in the area to come and deliver him, and they were really worried about the transferring process as well. They were really scared that he wouldn't make it on the ride here to this facility due to the fact that it's about 1.5 hours, 2 hours away. And they didn't have all the emergency equipment that you would need, all the machinery that you would need on the ambulance. So this was a very scary time period for us, waiting for him to be delivered to this unit. After some time there, they were able to transfer me from where I had delivered him up to the unit that they had put him at. And that's where I am currently. And they did it for the betterment of our family being able to be all together. Because of COVID and the things going on, only one visitor is allowed with the mother, and only one visitor is allowed with the child. So him and I aren't even technically allowed to go see Velvett at the same time. We do anyway. That being said, they cannot stop reminding me how far he has come from birth. They did not think he was going to make it, and we were forced to make the hardest decision any parent ever had to, which is where we decide whether or not they would resuscitate him in the case that he didn't make it. So if his heart rate dropped, if something went wrong, if he couldn't breathe for just a moment, we had made the decision not to resuscitate him and put him through under too much pressure in the case that he didn't make it. We didn't want to make him too uncomfortable while he was passing if they thought that the rate of survival would not have been affected. That wasn't until after we had to make the decision to try to keep him on treatments and try to keep him alive, versus them asking me if I'd like to just unplug him, lay him across my chest, and hold him during his last breaths, in which they also informed me that he might not even make it to me alive. So pretty much we'd just be spending time with our past newborn, and he'd be comfortable in our arms. That didn't happen. And actually he's doing so good that today I was offered the ability to pull that paperwork of the do not resuscitate, and we both agreed that we would like him fully resuscitated now, due to the fact that he is maybe in a critical condition, but he is no longer in a critical state. They did x-rays on his chest, and he is no longer leaking air. At first he was on 100% oxygen. Now he's on the lowest that they can give him, which is 21%. They had him on nitric oxide, which opened his lungs up and allowed him to breathe. They had him on dopamine, which helped him breathe more regularly. So right now we have a 25-week and 4 to 5 year old. The most precious thing that we ever laid eyes on, the smallest baby that you could imagine, and I'll let you see him here shortly. He has 2 IVs inside of his stomach. He has a breathing tube inside of his mouth, and he's been experiencing a lot of light treatment to help him with some of the problems and the complications that he's having now that result in like jaundice and whatnot. But the vitamin D is really helping. He has 2 lights on the top, and he's laying on top of a bed that is fully UV. With that being said, our situation has been so constantly changing, so constantly scary, that the moment we got the ability to be excited about our pregnancy and announce it to the world is the moment that our whole world got turned upside down with this terrifying news. And there's just no easy way to tell anyone that what you're experiencing could kill you, could kill your baby. And before I knew it, I was having him. I can't tell you how close this has brought our family, though. And we've really come together in this time of need, in the sense that we know that we could get through anything together, and that we could make any of these decisions together, and that as long as we have each other, that we'll get through this as a family. It's made me so, so grateful of our son Icarus, and it's made me so, so, so grateful of the time I've gotten to spend with Velvett. And all we can do is continue to hope for the best. As I should be discharged today or tomorrow from recovering from the cesarean section. And, I mean, he's beautiful. So we're just hoping that everybody roots for us. We're not going to be able to stay in the hospital with him through the time that he's going to need to be here for recovery. And due to COVID, we haven't had any money coming in, so we can't stay out inside of the same city that our child is in, unfortunately. He looks good. I think he looks good.
Can you see his eye open there?
Yeah, did it?
He's peeking.
See his little eye.
Can you turn the lights down just a little bit? He might open more. There you go. Your mama's over this way. You're like giving me the evil eye.
He's giving you the stink eye.
Yeah.
Aww.
Dude, that diaper.
Oh, did we throw the diaper out?
Did I just toss it?
Do you have the diaper still? It's okay. We weigh them, but we garbage pay.
It was pretty hefty.
Is that this one?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yep, that looks right.
Aww. You like holding on to stuff, don't you?
And as he gets bigger, if you come in and you notice he has a poopy diaper, you're welcome to change him.
Awesome.
Right now he's a little sick. I would wait for the nurse
Right.
just to help contain him in his tube if he loses his mind.
Right.
But when he gets bigger, you're gonna want to be able to come in and change him. And you can just leave it sitting by the sink for us, and we'll weigh it
Okay.
when you come back in the room.
Oh. You're holding on to mama. It's okay, baby. It's okay, baby. Touch his little head.
It's 5.
5? Perfect.
Oh, you don't like that. It's okay. Mama won't touch you out there.